Okay, so in this tutorial we'll study about the two very useful implementation of the bean factory post processors. As we know that there are two useful implementations of bean factory post processor. The job of bean factory post processor is to run after the bean factory is being loaded. That is, my context is loaded or the IOC container is loaded. At that point of time, the bean definitions are just there in the bean factory. And what do you mean by the term bean definitions and bean instantiation? These are two different terms. If we let's first understand that. If we go to the Spring life cycle, we know that a bean factory is being set up. So at this point of time, the bean definitions are just loaded. That is, the whatever beans I have defined in my spring.xml, like I have a director bean, address bean, and these have some member variables. So the bean address C is loaded in my Spring bean in my bean factory with the member variable name, city, and house number. But the values are not set. That is my bean definition loading. Means just the bean with member variables is being defined in the factory, but values are not being set. So this is what the bean factory setup means. Now after that runs the bean factory post processor, and whatever processing we want to do, we can do that. Like we want to set some member variables value, so for that we have a property placeholder configurer. And after that the bean factory definitions are loaded, and then bean's post processor is running, and the bean is ready to be used by the application. So we'll just discuss the bean lifecycle once more in detail. Before that, let's study about the placeholder configurer. Now, what does the property placeholder configurer do? Property placeholder configurer loads the property from one or more external property file and use those property to fill in the placeholder variables in the bean wiring XML file. What does it mean? Like suppose I am having a bean address C. It has two member variables, that is city and house number, and here I am hard coding the value like Delhi and 56. But I don't want to hard code this value. I want these values to be stored in some another property file, and later point of time those values should be filled in the placeholders used over here. So that is the job of property placeholder configurer. Let's see how we can use it. I'm having an address here, so let me create one property file first. So I'll be doing it for the bean address A. I can give any name to the key. I wrote address A dot city, and I wrote the value, say Chandigarh. I'm giving the same value as I used in the spring.xml. (2869). Let me save it in the Spring XML Spring application in the src folder. You can give any name like address dot properties. Click on OK. So this is being done. Now here I don't want these values to be hard coded, so just remove it and place the placeholder over here. So you are able to replace the hard coded configuration in the bean wiring with the placeholder variables, and these placeholder variables take the form $, then curly braces, and then variable, which is the same as you used in the JSP expression language. So here this is there, and what is the variable name? It's complete address A dot city. It's not mandatory to give it with dot. You can simply give the city and house number also. Now this is done. Now what is left is the mapping of the bean factory post processor. So that is my given by Spring only. So you need to give the ID, that is property configurer. And what's the class? The class name is Property Placeholder and this class of Spring take one property with the name, location, and the value, which is like my where the property file is, what is the name of my property file. So we have given this address dot properties. So this is my registration of the bean factory post processor, which is property placeholder configurer in the spring.xml. So other than this, everything remains same. Now let's just run it in the display data. Okay, you can see that we have got the value Chandigarh 2869, though we have not hard coded this value in the spring.xml, but still it automatically picks the fill the placeholder variables with the value defined in my property file, and this is done because of the bean factory post processor, that is property placeholder configurer in my spring.xml file. So this thing becomes very useful when you are integrating your Spring application with a JDBC. So suppose you are making a connection of your Spring application with a JDBC, then you need to store the URL, username, and the password. So all those variables can be stored in a property file, and at later point of time those can be filled over here. One more thing, just suppose that you are not having only one property file. You may have multiple properties file in your application. Like I have stored the address A in my address.properties. Similarly, suppose I want to store this Ludhiana 568 address in my another properties file and I want to pass it over here. Then that feature is also available in the property placeholder configurer. This location property, it allows you to work with single property file, but if you want to break down your configuration into multiple properties file, we need to use the locations property, and this locations take collection, that is list, that is it take a list of property files. So just the way we worked with the list collection, you need to use it over here. So let's try that also. Let me create another property file with the name address b.properties. So here I'll use you can copy this. Now this second address of the manager, which is Ludhiana 568, will also be filled from the properties file. I'll just rename it as address b dot properties. The only change you need to make is now the location will not be used, the locations property will be used, and what it accept is the list of properties file. So one value is this, and another we have apart from this, one more change we need to make, that is the placeholder variables need to be kept, just like we kept it for the address A. Let me rename it to address B. So here it becomes B and here it becomes B. So now it need to take the value for address A from this property file and address B from this properties file, and both the properties file are being defined in my spring.xml here, and the placeholder configurer is also kept. So let's run the application and see how it comes. Yes, so we are able to get the output for the first address as well as the second address. So this is how the Bean Factory post processor useful implementation in the form of property placeholder configurer works, and this becomes very useful when you're working with the like JDBC, Spring with JDBC connection or any Hibernate information. So at that point of time you can store all the values. Other than this, we also have one more Bean Factory post processor, that is custom editor configurer. This custom editor configurer will let you register the custom implementations of the property editor to translate the property wired values to some other property types, just like you did it in the Spring MVC. So it will work in the same way with the set as text method. So that's all about the Bean Factory post processor.